Okay, welcome back to the last part of Sci-Fi Fantasy Fiction's analysis notes outline. If you need your notes outline, you can print one off the website or you can get it out of your folder and you can restart the recording when you're ready. All right, today's lecture is the 4 parts of literary analysis. As you can probably tell, there are 4 main parts of literary analysis that we're going to talk about. The first one is making inferences, and we'll talk about what an inference is and how you make them. The second part is themes. The third part is vocabulary. The fourth part is author's choices. And all 4 of these parts are going to be things you're going to need to address in your project or in your paper or on your test. So you're going to want to pay attention. Each of these 4 areas play a major role in understanding the novel. If you can understand what's going on in these 4 areas, you can understand the novel. All right, let's start with making inferences. Now, first of all, an inference is a logical guess based on information in the text and on information that you should already know. They're pretty simple. We make them all the time. If you have white flakes in your hair when you walk into the school building in the morning, we might infer that it's snowing outside. That would be a logical guess. However, if you have white flakes in your hair after you've been in the building for 2 hours, we're not going to infer that it's snowing. We might instead infer that you have some dandruff going on. Now, both of these instances are based on the evidence of the white flakes in your hair. But the time you've been inside the building makes one more likely than the other. So you can see you make logical guesses or inferences all day long. Making inferences is required in literature. You do it even without thinking of it. The author won't always explain everything. If he did, it would be no fun to read the story. So what you need to do is use your best guess and the evidence given to you to make these inferences. As long as you have a logical explanation for what you're saying, your inference is possible. And that's what we're looking for on the test and in the projects. The only person who truly knows what he intended to say is the author himself. You're not the author, you're making a guess. Okay, the second area is themes. A theme is a lesson that the author wants us to learn by reading the book. We all learn themes when we're watching TV, when we're watching movies, when we're reading books. So we're going to take one that you're probably familiar with. One of the themes of Little Red Riding Hood is that you should always do what your parents tell you. Now, we get that theme because Little Red Riding Hood is told in the beginning, don't go off the path and don't talk to strangers. And when she goes off the path and talks to the wolf, she gets into trouble. So we learn the lesson that we should do what our parents tell us to do. Another theme of Little Red Riding Hood is that you shouldn't talk to strangers. And we learn that when Red talks to the wolf and, of course, gets eaten because of it. So themes are learned through what happens to the main characters. So you want to know who the main character in your novel is and find out what lesson he or she learns, and you're probably going to have your theme. Most of the time, the same lesson the main character learns is the one the author wants us as readers to learn. Authors always want to give us some kind of a message. They never just write a book for the fun of it. They're writing a book to tell us something. And you need to figure out what they're trying to tell us. Themes cannot be facts. They must be opinions. If they're facts, they're not themes. They're just facts. So you can't say that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is the theme, or something that happens in the story is the theme. That's not the theme. That might be plot, but it's not the theme. Themes are often expressed by what someone says or does in the novel. In this case, a quote. And that's your proof of the lesson learned. When you take your test, you're going to be asked what the theme is, and you're going to be asked to provide me one quote that shows me that theme, that backs it up. So please be aware and looking for those as you're reading your story. Good themes will still relate to people in society today. Not every story is going to be relevant today, but the good ones are. So hopefully if you're reading this book, it's good and it still relates to people today. All right, a universal theme is a theme that any person anywhere on earth will understand. There are a couple of them that we see over and over and over again. The first one is good always triumphs over evil. We see that in Star Wars, we see that in Shrek, we see, you name the movie, we see good triumphing over evil. Another universal theme is love can overcome all odds, and that we see in things like Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, in pick your romance movie. You've got that same theme everywhere. You want to watch out for these events and these words in your novel so you can talk about what the theme is on your test or in your project. Obviously, theme is the big reason that we read the book, so it's probably pretty important that you understand what the author was trying to tell you. The third area that we're going to talk about is vocabulary. Vocabulary is a huge part of understanding your novel because if you don't understand the meaning of the words used in the novel, you're not going to understand what the novel is trying to teach you. It's pretty simple. If you can't understand the words, you probably want to look at trying a different novel because it's going to be really a pain to have to look up every other word that you're reading. It's okay if you have to switch novels, but even in the novels you understand, there are going to be some words that you don't get. If you find a word in the novel which you don't understand, there are two ways to find the meaning of the word, and you do need to understand the meaning of the word. So here are your two ways. The first one is a denotative definition. In other words, you take the dictionary and you look up the meaning of the word. The dictionary is probably going to give you several meanings, but you have to figure out which one is the correct meaning. They're all a little bit different, and you figure out which one is correct by rereading the sentence and replacing the definition for the word to see if it makes sense. They will also give you in a dictionary pronunciation and etymology, which is how the word came about, where it came from. Is it Latin? Is it Greek? Is it any of those languages? And that might also help you figure out the meaning. The other way of figuring out the meaning is to use a connotative definition. This means using context clues to figure out what the word means. Context clues are the rest of the words in the sentence that are going to help you figure out what that word means. You use those all the time as well. So if a word is specific to an author or a work, in other words, if the author made the word up, connotative definitions are probably going to be the only option you have for defining the word. You're not going to be able to look it up in a dictionary because it's not a real word. So, if you've never read Brave New World, you won't understand the Bokanovsky's process is the process by which they clone people. He made that word up. The only way to know that is to read the book. And if you've never read The Golden Compass, you won't understand that a daemon, spelled D-A-E-M-O-N, is a physical representation of a person's soul. It represents as an animal, and so everybody has one of these things running around with them. But again, if you haven't read The Golden Compass, you're not going to put that together. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is the choices that the author makes. Authors make lots of choices as they're writing their novels. But we're only concerned with 4 of them. We're concerned with the format that they choose, the characterization that they use, the setting that they choose, and the genre that they choose. So if we understand these 4 choices, then we're going to understand the novel as a whole. So let's take a look at what these 4 choices are. The first one we're going to talk about is format. Format is the way the author chose to tell the story. Now that sounds really silly, but what we're talking about is different methods. There are many different ways an author can tell the story. We're only going to talk about a couple of the most popular, but they're ones that you've probably heard of. The first one is a frame story, where the events of the story have already happened and the story begins and ends with someone preparing to tell the story of previous events. If you've never seen a movie like this, a few examples of a frame story. Fried Green Tomatoes is an example of a frame story. The Butterfly Effect, all those kinds of things where they're starting at the end. The second method that authors choose to use is a flashback. The story starts at the end and we go back to the beginning to get the rest of the story. So we have a flashback when everything's already done and we get to see the result before we go back and hear how it happened. Memento is this way. If you've never seen that movie, it's a great movie. It starts with a shooting, guy shooting another guy, and you have to figure out why the heck did he shoot this guy? Well, the whole thing's in flashback. Another way is a flash forward, where the story starts in the present and then moves to a point in the future for the rest of the story. So there was actually a TV show called Flash Forward, where it started with a 30-second lapse of time, and then we flashed forward 2.5 years to get the rest of the story. That's a little bit less used than a flashback, but still out there. And the most common storytelling is chronological order, where events happen in time order. This is the most common because it makes the most sense. That's how you tell a story when you're talking to your friends. So a lot of stories are told chronologically. Regardless of what format the story uses, the format was chosen to help you understand the theme the story hopes to teach. Everything is centered around theme. The next thing we're going to talk about is characterization. There are two main types of characterization. The first one is direct characterization, where the author literally tells you what the character is like. And the second one is indirect characterization, where the reader must infer for themselves what the character is like. Both of these types are probably used in all of the books that you're reading, but the author is usually going to center on one more than the other. So you want to look at which one is more used in your story. Indirect characterization uses all of the following methods to help the reader understand the character. They're all centered around the character, obviously. We can hear the character's thoughts. We can see the character's actions. We can hear how the character speaks. We can see how the character looks. We can see how the character interacts with other people, and we can see how other people react to the character. All of these things are going to give us information about the character. The type of characterization will help you understand more about the author's feelings about the characters. Authors have feelings about their characters. They like them or they don't like them. Authors who like their main characters are more likely to use direct characterization because they want you to know the character like they do. But authors who dislike or who don't understand their main characters are more likely to use indirect characterization because they don't want to spend too much time thinking about their character. Okay, next one is setting. Setting is composed of two specific pieces of information. We have to know the time, and we have to know the location. So authors choose specific times and places to make specific comments about the themes that they're writing about. Raiders of the Lost Ark, which we've been talking about, was set in Europe during World War II. That is an important choice. Why? The movie had to be set in this time and this location because of the Nazi aspect. If the movie changed time periods, it would have to find a different antagonist, because the Nazis were only in power during the World War II. And if the movie had changed locations, it would also have had to find a different antagonist, because the Nazis never left Europe, and they wouldn't have been in South America. So setting plays a large part in the theme of the story. All right, you've got all the notes that you need to do a project or a paper or to take a test in Sci-Fi Fantasy Lit. So enjoy reading the rest of your book, and I'll see you in class.